President Biden speaking at Arlington National Cemetery. Let's listen.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a great honor to be standing here again. Over 160 years ago, during what would become his final days in office, President Abraham Lincoln addressed this nation, and he said, "Let us strive on to finish the work we're in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle." My fellow Americans, First Lady, Vice President Harris, and Second Gentleman, Secretary Blinken, Austin, McDonough, Mayorkas, Chairman Brown, most importantly, our veterans, service members, and their families. I've said it many times before. I got in trouble for saying it when I was a young senator. I said, we have many obligations, but only one truly sacred obligation. Sacred. To prepare those we send into harm's way and to care for them and their families when they return home and when they don't. It's an obligation, not based on party or politics, but on a promise that unites us all. And today, as we strive on to finish the work of our moment, to bind the nation's wounds once again, we commit and recommit to this sacred vow. This is the last time I will stand here at Arlington as Commander-in-Chief. It's been the greatest honor of my life to lead you, to serve you, to care for you, to defend you, just as you defended us, generation after generation after generation. You are the greatest fighting force, and this is not hyperbole, the finest fighting force in the history of the world. I'll never forget standing at Valley Forge, our nation's first soldiers laid down their lives to deliver a nation where everyone is entitled to inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I'll never forget walking the hills of Gettysburg, where thousands more shed their blood to make those words real. I'll never forget in Belleau Woods, visiting there to pay tribute to the heroes who stepped on that beach, or standing in the cliffs of Normandy 80 years after D-Day to honor the service members and veterans who literally saved the world with absolute heroism. Just standing there, you wonder how in God's name did they have the courage to do what they did. I'll never forget visiting bases in Korea, where America's sons and daughters answers a call to defend the people they had never met. For paying my respects in Hanoi, where so many of our troops defended democracy, including my friend and once worked for me, Senator John McCain. I'll never forget my trips to Afghanistan and Iraq, where tour after tour, young men and women served and sacrificed to keep our nation safe. 4 presidents faced a decision after we had gotten bin Laden whether to end our longest war in history in Afghanistan. I was determined not to leave it to the 5th. Every day I still carry a card with me, my schedule every single day for the last 10 years. On the back of my schedule it says, U.S. daily troops in Afghanistan. U.S. troops died in Afghanistan as of today, 2,465. Troops wounded in Afghanistan, 20,769. U.S. troops, Iraq, died in Iraq, 4,620. Wounded in Iraq, 32,766. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my duty as president, but also as a parent. Like many of you, our son Bo Biden deployed to Iraq for a year with the Delaware National Guard. I still remember the day he asked me to pin his bars on him. He stood ramrod straight. How proud Jill and I, our entire family felt. Like so many of you, we also remember how hard it was when he was deployed. Empty seats at the dinner table, missed holidays and birthdays, prayers of hope and worry, repeated every morning and every night. Just as we ask everything of our veterans, we ask everything of their families. The English poet John Milton wrote, and I quote, "They also serve who only stand and wait, as so many of you have." So for all the military families, to all those with a loved one still missing or unaccounted for, to all Americans grieving the loss of a loved one who wore the uniform, Jill and I want you to know we see you, we thank you, and we'll never stop working to meet our sacred obligation to you and your families. Jill and I, Doug and Kamala, our entire administration, are proud of our work over the past 4 years. Together we passed more than 30 bipartisan laws to support our veterans and their families, caregivers and survivors. We brought veterans' homelessness down to a record low. We delivered more benefits to more veterans than any ever before in VA history. We've invested resources to reduce the scourge of veteran suicide. We took action to protect veterans from scams because no veteran should be defrauded by those they defended. All these actions are vital, but I'm particularly proud of finally passing the PACT Act. This is the most significant law in our history, our nation's history, to help millions of veterans who are exposed to toxins like Agent Orange and burn pits during their military service. Pits the size of football fields that incinerated the wastes of war, tires, chemicals, batteries, jet fuel, and so much more. Pits that left too many veterans with headaches, numbness, dizziness, asthma, and cancer. The PACT Act has already helped over 1 million veterans and their families get the benefits they deserve. They deserve those benefits. Today, I'm proud to announce that the VA will expand the number of cancers covered under the PACT Act. And to all veterans who served at K2 Air Base in Uzbekistan, constantly surrounded by toxins, we want to honor you. We want to have your back, just like we did in Agent Orange, just like we're going to rule to make sure you don't have to prove your illness as a consequence of your service, which is often too hard to do. God willing, we will make sure that any rare condition you've developed is covered. We're committed to getting this rule in place by the end of my term. Folks, this matters. Too many of our nation's veterans have served only to return home to suffer from permanent effects of poisonous chemicals. Too many have died, like our son Bo and like Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, for whom the PACT Act was named. A couple years ago, after I signed the PACT Act, I handed a pen to his daughter, Graylee. She and her mom are with us today. I don't know where you are, but God love you. There they are. Stand up, ladies. Give me a word, I mean this. I'll never forget. After I handed the signing pen, that beautiful young lady who lost her whole world, she held the pen in her hand, and she looked at me and she said, "Thank you. Thank you for my daddy. God love you, honey. God love you." But I don't think she was just thanking me. She was thanking all of you here, all of us, everyone who fought hard and came together to keep our promise to our veterans, to keep the faith. My fellow Americans, we stand here today. We think about all that our veterans have given to our nation, serving and sacrificing in uniform, just as they serve and sacrifice here at home, as educators, firefighters, law enforcement officers, construction workers, entrepreneurs, business leaders, doctors, nurses, elected leaders, and so much more. Just as they routinely put aside differences to work together, this is the moment. This is the moment to come together as a nation, to keep faith in each other. The world is dependent on each of you and all of us, all of you, to keep honoring the women and the men and the families who have borne the battle, to keep protecting everything they fought for, to keep striving to heal our nation's wounds, to keep perfecting our union. We're the only nation in the world built on an idea. Every other nation is based on things like geography, ethnicity, religion. But we're the only nation, the only in the world, built on an idea. And that idea is we're all created equal, deserve to be created equal throughout our lives. We haven't lived up to it every time, but we've never walked away from it. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And today, standing together to honor those Americans who have dared all, risked all, and given all to our nation, we must say clearly, we never will give up. God bless our veterans and their families. May God protect our troops today and always. God love you. Thank you so much.
President Biden speaking at Arlington National Cemetery, giving his final remarks on Veterans Day as he pays tribute to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, but more importantly, on Veterans Day, those who served in any capacity, whether or not they gave the ultimate sacrifice. And he's there with Kamala Harris, the vice president, the first time we've seen them together since she lost last week to Donald Trump in the election. And we heard him speak about his foreign policy record, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which, again, he defended. He also referenced, as he does so many times when he is speaking about veterans and about the cost of war, his own son, Beau, who he believes developed a brain tumor in part, or maybe just because of being exposed to the burn pits while he was serving. We all want to say thank you so much to your service, for everybody out there who is a veteran. And now we're going to turn to start with what's going to happen next here in Washington. News on the second Trump administration. Sources tell CNN the president-elect will name Stephen Miller as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Miller is the man behind Donald Trump's mass deportation plan. He was one of the most hardline voices in the first Trump White House, and this time around, he's set to have even more influence. CNN's Elena Treen broke the story from West Palm Beach. Elena, what are you learning?
Well, that's right, Dana. Donald Trump is expected in the coming days to announce that Stephen Miller will be serving as his deputy chief of staff for policy. And look, back in the first Trump White House, Stephen Miller was a senior advisor, but he had a lot of influence. He also helped write a lot of Donald Trump's speeches, but he was also one of the key architects of Donald Trump's hardline immigration policies. And this time around, that has not changed. He has really been the lead architect ahead of a second Trump term for the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. And he has had a lot of influence with Donald Trump. He did back then. He does even more so now. It's unclear exactly how immigration and how it is going to be run in a second Trump term. But when I talk to a lot of sources who are with Donald Trump right now on that island behind me, hunkered down at Mar-a-Lago, they say a lot of what is going to be the decisions that are going to be made are going to be happening likely from the White House. And I think you'll see Stephen Miller have a very big say in all of that policy. Now, I also think it's worth noting that in the years after Donald Trump had left the White House, Stephen Miller continued to be a very close ally of Donald Trump's. He actually worked outside at a legal firm at America First Legal, something that Miller led, where he also was the head on a lot of lawsuits against Democratic policies. I think you'll also see some of that carry into his role in a second Trump term. Now, I also just want to note some of the other big policy decisions that we have seen be made over the last 24 hours. Donald Trump announced, our own Caitlin Collins broke this first, but he announced that he is selecting Elise Stefanik. She is the number 4 in the House as the conference chair of the House Republicans. To serve as his UN ambassador. Stefanik has also been a very close ally of Donald Trump. She has been one of the first people to come out and support him after he announced his 3rd bid for the White House. Unclear exactly what her role will look like as UN ambassador. I think they're still deciding what kind of power she will have, but she is going to have a big role in a second term. And then he also now announced that Tom Homan, the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is going to be a border czar. So I imagine he'll be working very closely with Miller on all immigration policy moving forward. Dana?
Alana, thank you so much. Thanks for that great reporting and for breaking the news about Stephen Miller. Here at the table, we have some other exceptional reporters, Josh Dawsey of The Washington Post, Heidi Przybyla of Politico, and CNN's very own MJ Lee. Before we get started on our discussion, I just want to play a little bit of a flavor of Stephen Miller, who he is, what he says, and what he believes.
America is for Americans and Americans only.
You have 2 policy objectives that you proceed with utter determination on. Seal the border, no illegals in, everyone here goes out. That's very straightforward. You would establish large-scale staging grounds for removal flights. So you grab illegal immigrants and then you move them to the staging grounds, and that's what the planes are waiting for federal law enforcement to then move those illegals home. You deputize the National Guard to carry out immigration enforcement.
I remember when Stephen Miller was press secretary to then Senator Jeff Sessions, and this was exactly what he would say over and over again anytime you would pick up the phone and he would call. At the time, he was definitely not where the party was. Now he is, and those policies, they are the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think Stephen Miller is pugilistic. He is a studier of all sorts of policy. I mean, when he in this job, it's really interesting to me. In the first Trump administration, Stephen had a kind of an amorphous job, but he would call deep into agencies. He would call into DHS. He would call into immigration agencies and give them orders. He, really knew how to work the levers of a government in a way that sort of showed a sophisticated understanding of how to get things done. And he often frustrated colleagues of his agencies, even cabinet secretaries, who couldn't believe that all of a sudden they had low-level employees who had been given orders directly from Stephen Miller that the administration maybe itself had not announced. But Stephen's always had the ear of the president. He often writes for the president-elect. His voices, the rallies are coming in Stephen's voice, a lot of it. He sort of understands where Trump's going to go. He's as in on immigration. And really, he was one of the most influential people in the first Trump administration behind the scenes on basically his entire immigration agenda. And I think that only grows here.
And for somebody who has had people come and go, and people who were kind of dismissed and people who were let back, some were never let back in, he has been a constant.
A constant. And, I was talking to someone in the immigration advocacy world just this morning, and upon hearing this news, they said, I'm almost less interested, at least on the immigration front, on the question of who Trump is going to appoint to head up DHS, because now we know that it is going to be Stephen Miller at a top position at the White House. It's exactly what Josh was talking about here. We know what kind of sway he has. We know how much his vision for on immigration, on mass deportation, all of these ideas have shaped the Donald Trump view of immigration. And I think it just goes to show, we have not had many appointments yet, many announcements on top positions. The fact that this is coming quite early, that he has made up his mind, knows that he wants Stephen Miller to have this top, very important position to shape policy in the Trump White House, I think speaks volumes.
And Heidi, just in that vein, it's not just Stephen Miller. We also heard about Tom Homan, who is somebody who was an acting ICE director under the first Trump administration, and now he will be ICE plus a quote-unquote border czar. Listen to what he told Fox this morning.
I've been clear, President Trump's been clear. Public safety threats and national security threats will be the priority because they have to be. They pose the most danger to this country. So we're going to prioritize those groups, those who always have final orders, those that had due process at great taxpayer expense, and the federal judge says you must go home, and they didn't. They became a fugitive.
I think it's going to be important over the next 4 years to frame a lot of what we hear through perception and then reality, right? Because you just heard two different things there. Stephen Miller said we're going to deport all of them, and Homan said we're going to have to prioritize. So which one is it? Because there are 10 million undocumented immigrants right now, and the estimate is that it would cost $88 billion per year. You will also need congressional approval in order to get those funds. And you already hear some of these Republicans, such as Senator Barrasso, not committing to that big ticket price. So again, many of these people are already here, who are here are already detained. They're already in criminal proceedings. So then what population are we actually talking about, and what is going to be the reality?
Well, it seems like the reality, if they have their way, is all of the above, that it is a priority. I talked to Jim Jordan, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, yesterday, who said first priority is the people who are criminals, convicted criminals, and then the rest.
Yeah. Well, that's right. But it will also be curious to see if they can make the logistics of this work. I mean, I was talking to John Kelly, former chief of staff, a couple of years ago, and he was describing to me, if you really were trying to do these mass deportations, how much, of the federal government you'd have to grow, how much money it would cost to put these people potentially in camps. I mean, this would be just such a huge operational burden, and whether they can pull that off or not, even, if this is what they want to do, I'm not saying they can, I'm just saying it would take a remarkable amount of government working together, a remarkable amount of money, remarkable amount of personnel, a lot of things that are hard to do. It's hard to harness the federal government in that way sometimes.
Federal and local law enforcement, which is what they're also saying. I just want to move on to another bit of news Caitlin Collins broke over the weekend, which is Elise Stefanik. She will be the new president's ambassador to the UN. And I think that Elise Stefanik is so fascinating because the Stephen Millers of the world were, ride or die from the beginning. Not Elise Stefanik. She is, to me, the ultimate example of the shift in the GOP. She worked for the Bush White House. She worked for Mitt Romney in 2012. She was elected in 2014 as a moderate. She didn't even vote for the Trump tax cuts. She became a Trump defender after the first impeachment, started raising all of that money, saw kind of what it did and what it meant for her profile in the, of course, Trump Republican Party, and she never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many Republicans who have gone through this political evolution during the Trump years, going from a Trump critic to a Trump supporter. I think you're totally right that when you talk to folks in Washington, Republicans, Democrats, friends who have known her for many years, she actually tends to fall in this really unique category. I mean, people are stunned when they think about her sort of arc of evolution politically, not just going from a staunch critic, but one of the most staunchest supporters of Donald Trump on all of the issues. And I think this appointment and this choice probably goes to show you, I mean, this is exactly what she had in mind. She wanted to ride the Trump wave. She also knew that it was going to be extremely helpful for her to embrace Donald Trump if she were to have any shot at staying in her seat. I think we should also just quickly talk about, because of the position we are talking about, her views on the United Nations. She has called the group anti-Semitic throughout the course of the Israel war. She was also questioned whether the U.S. should continue funding it. So there are actually real foreign policy questions at play here for this really important role.
Real quick.
I think it's important to look at the pattern here of who's being appointed. This is very different than the first Trump administration, where you had a lot of institutional Republicans there who were supposed to be the guardrails. This is unabashedly a bench of Trump loyalists.
Yep, so important. Everybody stand by. Coming up, Democrats are dealing with an identity crisis, fighting over the very culture wars that some may have cost. They believe that they may have cost them the election. Plus, how did Trump pull off this decisive win? His campaign's political director is my guest this hour.